bombarded them at all times of day to try and put this together. So Jen, Tracy, David, and where Tom is as well. Thank you very much, it's hugely appreciated. I'm going to hand over to Tracy now from the National Trust, and then to Lucy from our scientific committee, and then David, and then we can go for a nice walk, and I'll catch up with you later on. Thanks very much.
Good morning everyone, and welcome to National Trust Purbeck. I'm Tracy Churcher, I'm the General Manager of the National Trust Purbeck Estate, which is one of the largest estates within the National Trust. We're really lucky. We go from the heritage of Corfe Castle to the great expanse of the National Nature Reserve. We have farms and we have Studland, which is visited by about 1.5 million people a year, so it's a big visitor destination. Most people come here within the summer months for their trip to the beach and to enjoy the beautiful warm waters, sheltered waters of this bay, which are unusual in that they're east facing. And it's quite shallow, so it's a lovely, lovely place to come, a very natural landscape. I wanted to say a big welcome to Swanage School, who is one of our local partners, and for those of you who are drivers and part of the ExtremeX team, half of these young people are really into their ecology and the science, and half of them are in the throes of building a new electric car to be racing next year themselves. So they're the next generation of you guys, and we're lucky to have them on our doorstep and to be part of it. So please speak to them and inspire them so they continue with both of our dual pleasures, which are clearly the environment as well as racing. I also want to thank Extreme E for choosing us to be the legacy partner. You may think that actually all we have to do is drive up in the dark of night, kidnap some beavers from Scotland, bring them down, and there you go. If only it was so easy. To bring these very charismatic mammals back into a landscape where they've been absent for 400 years, it's not something you can do lightly. Jen Crisford, who is our beaver officer, our project officer, has already been working for 2 years. You're bringing animals into a landscape where they're going to have physical impacts, which you'll find out more about, and also cultural impacts. They change the world that they're in. So we have to work within the context of stakeholders, neighbours, people who own land or whose use of land is going to be impacted by these creatures. And at the moment we've put our licence application in and we're waiting to hear if we've been successful. But the work that Jen has done for the last 2 years has been instrumental in putting in a strong licence bid. So hopefully we're going to get that approval within the new year, now the government consultation is finished. And it doesn't finish there either. We can't, as I say, when we find these animals, we have to make sure that they're healthy. We have to make sure that it's fine to release them. We have to know where we're releasing them. We have to monitor the impacts when they're released to make sure that they're acceptable, both on a physical level, but also on what we deem a cultural level. So that is the stakeholders, the people around here, can accept the changes these amazing landscape architects will bring, because not everybody thinks it's a good thing. That's the reality of bringing about change and ecological pressure in, a delicate climate. And for us, one of the big opportunities going forwards is with 1.5 million visitors a year, many of whom are urban and may not have detailed knowledge about the climate and ecological emergency we're in, we've got an ongoing opportunity to engage and inspire those people to care for this very, very precious planet. And that comes with cost. So thank you so much for choosing us to be your legacy partners. The money will be really, really well spent. And fingers crossed that we'll get that licence application within the new year. To give you the wider context and the ecology, I'm going to hand over to Professor Lucy Woodall. Got it. Who's going to tell you a bit more. My team, however, David is our landscape partnership manager. Jen's our beaver project officer. We've got Tom at the back, who's our engagement manager. We've got Julia, who's our dynamic dunescapes, and we've got Mark at the back, with who's our countryside manager. And you'll hear from all of us over the day, but just so you know who the National Trust team are. Thank you and welcome.
Well, good morning everyone. I just also want to say a welcome, and it's a welcome on behalf of the Scientific Committee of Extreme E. Thank you, Tracy, for the introduction. I am Lucy Woodall. I'm an associate professor at the University of Oxford, where my team studies marine ecosystems and conservation, and we essentially look at what's there and why and how humans are changing those systems. Particularly my lab looks beyond scuba depth, so deeper than about 30 meters, down into the deep sea. So we're really interested in maybe those little critters that yet haven't been discovered or been found, and how do they interact with the environment. And of course, I'm very lucky. I get to go on ships. I get to go down in submersibles, drive ROVs, and have a lot of exciting technology at our fingertips so that together we can explore these really unique places. One thing about my work is that all of our research questions are done in co-creation with the nations with whom I work. I work often with island states in the Indian Ocean, so I've had the real privilege of spending time in Comores and Seychelles and Maldives, but really helping them to ask what are the questions that they really need to know to protect their environment, and of course we know that's really important. So I think for me, on reflection, having a race here in the UK was really important because it allowed us, as everyone in this room but further afield, to really reflect on UK biodiversity. And we've seen in the races already this year of places that may be a little bit degraded, and challenges and opportunities, and really awesome projects that are going ahead and really changing those ecosystems for the better, but critically also the communities that live in and around them. And being able to do that here in Dorset has really helped us reflect on UK biodiversity intactness, which really means what should be in this environment and what's here now is really low. It's about 53% according to latest figures, and ideally for a healthy ecosystem we'd be looking at 90%. And I'm just going to leave that for a moment for you to reflect on the difference between 90 and 53. So of course a lot of the changes we've had around the UK have been historic because we've got lots of urban areas. But with reintroductions and rewilding of areas like the project here in Dorset, we can really think about how are those ecosystem services and processes, so the benefits that these environments give to us as humans and to the wider planet, can come back after many, many generations. And I think that's really exciting, and I'm super pleased to be here today and learning so much from the team. So thanks for including me. I just wanted to say a couple of other things. I personally feel that we have a disconnect from nature. So Tracy, I really took on board what you're saying about the visitors that come here, many of them from urban environments, and maybe this is the first time they've ever seen sand dunes, maybe first time they've seen heathers, maybe sometimes the first time people have ever seen the water. I know that seems crazy on a small island, but many of us here have had privilege and opportunity to explore some of the most beautiful places in the world. But we can't say that is true about all of our neighbours and colleagues. So it really gives us an opportunity to reflect both on our privilege and what we can do. So I just want to say thank you very much to National Trust. Looking forward to learning loads, as I've said, and looking forward to talking to you all and understanding your point of view on this and other projects throughout the season. So thank you, and over to you, David.
Thank you. It's not going to be a lecture. Got half a dozen slides, no more, but I think it felt quite important for us locally to give you a bit of the context. The beavers are kind of what's happening now, that's the exciting stuff, that's what the Extreme E legacy is about, but it comes within a landscape and a sort of piece of work that's been going on for decades now to try and rebuild that intactness that Lucy was talking about. I think it's actually a story of hope. We are recovering nature here. It's more nature-rich than it was 50 years ago, and there's very few bits of certainly Lowland Britain you can say that about, and beavers are part of that journey. So the landscape you're in, I'm aware of some of you won't know Dorset at all, we're in a national nature reserve, the Purbeck Heathland National Nature Reserve. You've worked out where you are in the country now, but sort of halfway along the south coast of the UK. Talk about heathlands, some of you may be familiar with what we mean by heathlands, some of you may not. We think of heathlands generally as landscapes, dwarf, shrub, dominated landscapes, particularly with heather here, and there's quite a lot of that. But I think it's important to say it's more than just that. Actually what we've got here is a really rich, interconnected mosaic of all sorts of different habitats, and that's what makes it so special for nature. So yes, we've got a lot of heathland, but there's areas of grasslands, areas of woodlands and scrub, a lot of coastal habitats, a lot of wetlands, we've got salt marshes on the shore of Poole Harbour and mudflats, and then this fantastic sand dune system which we'll be exploring later on today. And it's the fact that all of those habitats are all interspersed together that makes them more than the sum of their parts for nature. And because of that, you actually one of the most nature-rich parts of the UK because it probably has got the highest level of intactness of any of our lowland areas here. So if you've driven from Corfe Castle, you've driven through the most biodiverse 10 kilometres square of the whole of the UK. That's all sorts of interesting, particularly botanically, but in terms of records of invertebrates and mammals as well. It's very biodiverse. It's also, linked with that, it's a stronghold of all sorts of very rare and special species you'll find here you won't find anywhere else. And just a few, and we can have a long list of examples, but this sort of thing here, this is our big five. A little wasp, mason wasp, lays its eggs in little clay pots that it makes itself. It's called the Purbeck mason wasp because it occurs in Purbeck, nowhere else in the UK. That's a kind of carnivorous plant, a sundew, best place in the UK for carnivorous plants. We think of them as big tropical things, but actually we've got a lot of species, about 11 species of carnivorous plant within about half a mile of where you are here. There's one, the Godlingston sundew. It was discovered to science in a wetland about 500 metres that direction from where we're standing now. It's a really special stuff. This, I can't do a presentation without my favourite fungus. The only place you'll find that in England and Wales is where we're walking this morning on the sand dunes here. We don't have many reptiles in the UK, but this is one of the areas where you'll find all of our native reptiles. The highest density of sand lizards, again, anywhere in the UK is within Studland, a bit of an aspect of here. So it's a special landscape for nature. There are bits of the UK which do still have that intactness. But, like pretty much everywhere else, it was better. Couple of hundred years ago. Now that's Poole Harbour. This is the English Channel here. This map from the 1750s. The areas in black were the heathlands then. 200 years later, 85% of them have disappeared, and that's because of urban development. It's because of commercial forestry. It's particularly because of commercial agriculture. Purbeck was one of the areas that did resist most of those losses, and in a way that's when our journey started here, because in the 1950s and 60s those remaining heaths were protected in law. They were the first nature reserve, the first site of special scientific interest, and that's what's enabled us to now start rebuilding that nature. But what's critical about what's happened here, unlike a lot of places, is as well as looking after those old heaths, we have over the last 20, 30 years been restoring some of the ones that have been lost. So reconnecting these dots, rejoining that original heathland landscape. And that's important. And it's been not just a National Trust story, it's been all sorts of landowners, NGOs, public sector and private landowners as well. And we've reached quite a significant point now. So that here, when they first declared the nature reserves in the 50s and 60s, this was the bit of the landscape which was protected. So where we are now is about here. Yeah. Last year, we recovered so much of that heathland landscape that these original designations were no longer relevant, really. And the whole of this landscape was designated as a super national nature reserve, the first of its kind in the UK. And that's a really exciting story of kind of really recovering the landscape for nature. It's important not just because it's of its scale, but one of the things we've learned over the last 50, 60 years is you can't conserve nature in small, isolated nature reserves, putting a fence around it. Nature needs space, it needs to move, and it particularly needs to move in terms of what's happening in the future with climate change and all sorts of threats. Nature needs space to move around and to find its niche. And that's what we're doing here. We're creating a big, fluid landscape that nature can thrive in. And as I say, it's one of the few places you'll come to where it's probably more intact and more nature-rich now than it was 50 years ago. Not just about nature, it is about nature, but actually we are also restoring this landscape for people. So this is a piece of work we're doing. Look at this nature reserve from the perspective of ecotourism. We all need wild spaces, and we're creating a wild space here that's better for people. The more nature-rich it is, the more important that is to people. It reconnects us to ourselves, to nature. It's also this is Bournemouth and Poole up there. It's a few miles from here, 400,000 people. This is their local breathing space, and the more the better that is, the better that is for them. One of our challenges here is to actually look at our local economy. If our local economy can be something that is something that values nature rather than something that exploits nature, we then really start to talk about sustainability. So we're embracing the idea of not just doing kind of nature over there, but celebrate that, putting that at the heart of the community, part of the local economy. We're working on an ecotourism strategy that will hopefully mean that more and more landowners want to do this with their land in the future, and that's really gaining traction now. But just last slide, or a couple of slides, back to the ecology. Okay, so it's great. We've created a big landscape, nature can move around in it. But actually, we also know that's not enough. Yeah? If we just, our nature, we're coming from a point where it's so depleted that if we just protect the landscape and step back and leave it, all that will happen is vegetation will erode and it will become a fairly uniform, actually not very species rich, scrubland than woodland. And the reason for that is there's a whole level within our natural ecosystem here which has disappeared and been missing for centuries, which is the role of large animals, large herbivores, ecosystem engineers. Yeah? So if you go back kind of prehistory, you've had all sorts of animals that are now extinct, you might have heard of, like mammoths and mastodons and aurochs and tarpans. They were the things that shaped the landscape. They were the things that ate vegetation from one area and left it in other areas. So you had kind of grasslands in one area and woodland in other areas. They're the things that, through their behaviour, disturbed the ground, created the bare sand that sand lizards and hermit mason wasps use for their habitat. If they've gone, we need to find something to replace them. And that's where we're at the stage now. We've got a landscape that's big enough that we can start restoring some of those natural processes that really drive nature recovery. So we can't bring back mammoths and aurochs and mastodons because they're all extinct. But what we can do is look at our modern day equivalent herbivores and start managing them in a way that they mimic their natural ancestors. And we've got a really exciting project in the western half of the nature reserve where we're taking down all internal fences, creating a huge grazing unit. We're wilding our cattle, we're bringing in ponies, we're using deer to mimic the native bred deer, and we're bringing back pigs to mimic the role of wild boar. So there's that's an exciting way of really restoring that functioning ecology. But there's one herbivore that hasn't actually gone extinct, and we can bring back, and it can just slot right back into what it used to do, and that's the herbivore in the wetlands, and that's the beaver, and that's really where we're up to now. So we're looking at the wild grazing in the west of the NNR, and in the east, here, at Studland, we're bringing back this chap. So Jen is our beaver expert. Jen is the one who will say, as we walk around, all about the details of anything you need to know about beaver biology or ecology. She can tell you. But as a sort of fairly simple overview, they're the engineers of wetlands. We call them engineers because they can modify their environment to create the habitat they need. So that they're wetland creatures. If they haven't got deep enough water, they'll build a dam and create the deep enough water for them. In doing so, they completely modify the course, all of our water courses, all of our streams. They create pools and wetlands, they slow the flow, they create a much more rich and complicated habitat. And we know from everywhere else they've come back in the UK, that drives an absolute explosion in biodiversity. It goes up by an order of magnitude, the numbers of species, the biomass of species, and the resilience of those species. And if we can bring get beavers back in our wetlands, they'll do that here as well. Not just biodiversity. In being here, in naturalising our watercourses, they clean the water, they strip out pollution and nutrients, they raise the water tables, they reduce risk of drought in summer, they slow the flow, so they reduce the risk of floods in winter, and they massively increase the amount of carbon that's stored, dissolved organic carbon in the water body as well. So these can transform our landscape. But as Tracy alluded to earlier, it's not quite as simple as bringing them in now, just bringing them and letting them go, because they can cause, we don't want, our landscape is so humanised, we can't let them just flood everywhere they want to go. So Jen's role over the last 2 years is to work out, okay, we can bring beavers here to where we're going to go today, they won't cause any conflict there, that's a nature reserve, but once they spread into the wider landscape, how can we make them work for everybody, and where do we need to kind of intervene and manage them and so on. And that's what this project is going to support. It's going to enable us to not just bring them here, but make them work for everybody. Thank you. So I'll probably run over time.
Yeah.
I think that's it now. I'm the last speaker this morning. Where's Geordie? Are we going off, Geordie?